Now let's try to understand finally in Java. So let's say you are acquiring a resource here. So let's say you are creating an object of input stream to take the input, let's say, and you are having this try catch block. Inside this try catch block, you have some set of code, let's say, and there is a set of code. Let's say you are using this input stream here only, and this might cause an exception. So here you are using this input stream and this might cause an exception, might or might not. And just after this particular code, you are closing this particular input stream. So if you're acquiring a resource, you have to ensure that you release it. So let's say you're closing this particular input stream here. Now, what happens is that this particular set of code throws an exception. In that case, what happens is that we come to this particular place, we come to this particular catch block. So in that case, this iron.close will never get executed. This is something that we don't want. We want that if we are acquiring any resource, we should close it properly or we should release it properly. So in this case, what will happen is that this iron.close won't be executed and this particular resource won't be released. So how can we do that? So there are two things. Number one, that it might happen exception occurs, or it might happen that exception don't occur. So if exception occurs, what we can do is, what you can think of this, that okay, let's say what I'll do is that I'll just put one more iron.close inside the catch block. So in this case, if exception occurs, this particular thing will take place, and if exception don't occur, then obviously this particular line will get executed and this particular resource will be released. But think of that situation when you have multiple catch block. In that case, you'll have to write iron.close in each of the catch block, plus you'll have to write it here also, which obviously is something complicated. We can make it much simpler and less error prone using this finally keyword. So let's see how do we use finally in Java. So what we do in case of finally is, we have a try block, we have a catch block, and just after this catch block, we keep a finally block. And in this finally block, I will close this particular input stream. So what I'll do is, just after this catch block, I'll have this finally block, and let's say this comes here. And I can simply remove this iron.close from here, because this particular iron.close will ensure that resource is closed irrespective of whether exception occurs or not. So whenever I write anything inside finally, that means that irrespective of whether exception occurs or not, this finally block always gets executed. So in first case, if exception occurs, obviously we come to this catch block, and just after catch block we have finally, the finally gets executed and this iron.close gets executed. In case exception doesn't occur, in that case also this catch block won't get executed, but this finally will get executed and this particular thing will be closed. And in case we have, let's say, several catch block and none of the catch block is matching with the exception that is thrown, in that case also this finally will get executed and the resources will get closed. So we generally use finally when we have some critical resources or some resources that we really want to close. In that case, we can use finally and we can release those resources inside this particular finally block. So I'll just repeat the syntax of finally. So we have try block, we have catch block just after try, and just after catch we have finally block. We can have finally without catch as well. So in that case, we will have try and we will have finally. So in case there is any exception that is occurring in the try, that obviously will be thrown to the calling function and that should handle that particular exception. In either case, whether exception occurs in this try or not, this finally will get executed. So this is the use case of finally. Remember that finally is something that always gets executed, and we generally use this to close the resources. So as you can see that we have to use finally for closing the resources every time, and we have to manually put in the resources or manually closing the resources. So there is something called try with resources statement that has recently been introduced in Java 7. Let's see how this works and how we not have to use finally if we are using this. So the way of using try with resources, that we initialize or we create objects of all the resources inside try like this, and then we have the block. So let's take an example. If we have to create the input stream, we'll create it inside, we close this bracket, and whatever code has to be written will be written inside this try block. So what happens in this case is that irrespective of whether exception occurs in this or not, this IN will always be automatically closed. So this is the benefit. You don't have to write finally explicitly. Whatever resources you define inside this particular bracket, irrespective of whether an exception occurs or not, this is automatically closed as soon as we exit this particular block. So that is the use of try with resource statement.